Doing it again.
It is live. We are live. Good afternoon from Cornwall, from me at least, and from the rest of the team. We've just had the 14 most nerve-wracking minutes trying to get this meeting live on the web. Professor Broderick has dropped out to save the bandwidth in this house, and we seem to have just about managed it by routing it via Portugal. So, without further ado, we're going to start answering your questions, the much awaited questions and answers. And I'm going to start just to make sure it's all working. Both Emily Eastman and Mustafa Aksisu asked, since lockdown measures have been put in place throughout the globe, I have seen many articles stating there has been an increase in numbers of nesting turtles on the quieter beaches. Is this likely to be truly the case? Might it cause problems later on? And I think the answer to that is yes. While there are unlikely to be more turtles nesting in total, it's quite possible that turtles are now nesting in places that were previously too busy for them and a bit too noisy, a bit too lit, and they were disturbed. So consequently, that's not such a bad thing, but there is a potential for that to be an ecological trap once these restaurants or beachfront properties start being occupied again later in the season, because the lights and the noise might attract hatchlings that emerge from those nests. And we've seen that before in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and in Africa, where turtles come out after midnight when everyone's gone to bed, but hatchlings come out before midnight when people are still up partying. So it's kind of good, and it shows that more could be done to mitigate some of these problems, but there aren't more turtles nesting because of the lockdown in total, undoubtedly. So the next question, we're going to shuffle around a little bit. The next question is to Emily, to Dr. Emily Duncan, who's a postdoctoral researcher. She looks like she's under the sea at the moment, but she's here with us in Cornwall. And Jocelyn Carson asks, what are the top 3 threats to sea turtles?
Hi, everybody. Well, sea turtles are under a lot of threats, but since direct harvest has largely stopped, the first biggest threat to sea turtles is bycatch or accidental catch in fisheries. And then the second one is probably climate change. So climate change can cause storms to destroy habitats on nesting beaches. It can reduce productivity in foraging areas, cause coral bleaching or ocean acidification, which is all really going to impact marine turtles in foraging and nesting. And also a little bit linked to the question previously is uncontrolled coastal development. So this destroys both nesting habitat and also increases light pollution. So hatchlings find it more difficult to get to the sea. Additionally, there are many other new threats emerging. I work on plastic pollution myself, and this can impact sea turtles through ingestion, entanglement, and habitat destruction. And there's many knowledge gaps, such as the effects on really tiny pelagic turtles. We still don't know much about how they're impacted. But yes, the 3 main are bycatch, climate change, and coastal development.
Thank you, Emily. The next question is from Rita, all the way over in Portugal, although she's pictured on the island of Pilau in Guinea-Bissau there. Rita used to be a PhD student, but she's now a postdoc working between Lisbon and also in Cornwall and in Africa. Her question is from Coral Smith. How much disturbance do you think swimming and snorkeling with nearby turtle causes them? And should this type of wildlife tourism be encouraged or discouraged? Weighing up possible costs and benefits.
Hi, everyone. So, well, swimming, snorkeling, or scuba diving with the near turtles should not have an impact, provided that these activities are well regulated, well managed. So some important things to have in mind is that there should be a maximum number of people that swim in the marine turtle habitat at the same time. Obviously, people cannot surround or touch the animals, and if people are being transported by a motorboat, speed limits need to be enforced and followed to avoid boat strikes. And of course, the turtles should always be left to do their normal activities, being it swimming, feeding, or resting. Also, I'd like to say that depending on the intensity of the tourism activities, sometimes it's good to have like a manage of the spatial habitat such that the turtles have like a good quality areas they can go into if they feel disturbed, and the habitat should be taken in consideration because a lot of these activities take place in coral reefs, and we know that clumsy swimmers can destroy the fragile structures of the corals. So the guides also need to know, what kind of people they're dealing with and manage all that. That being said, I personally think that it's a wonderful experience. It's one of the experiences that probably raises more awareness for marine conservation and definitely can bring economic benefits for local communities. And yes, in some cases, it replaces previous illegal poaching of turtles and eggs. Like in many cases, you have people that were previous poachers and now they are involved in ecotouristic activities. So well managed, I think it should be encouraged, yes.
Okay, thank you, Rita. The next question is for Robin, who's over in Cyprus. He was a PhD student here now, but he's now a postdoc working in Cyprus, doing all sorts of work on fisheries related to sea turtles and other marine megafauna, working very closely with the artisanal fishers. He has a question from Jocelyn Carson, and it's quite a simple question. Does eating shrimp harm sea turtles?
Hey, thanks, Jocelyn. Well, to be honest, it depends where the shrimps are caught. Shrimps have been flagship species for sea turtle bycatch for a couple of decades now because a lot of attention was put into trawling for shrimps in the USA, and there have been many studies into trying to reduce sea turtle bycatch in trawl fisheries, specifically using turtle excluder devices. In the 1920s, with the advent of diesel engines and power winches, otter trawling or bottom trawling, which is dragging a very large net along the bottom of the sea bay, quite non-target specific fishing and very damaging to the habitats as well as the things that are actually being caught, expanded a lot through the last century. And with the industrialization of the canning process for shrimp, shrimp became one of the main food sources for the world, and so shrimp farming increased, and by the 1980s we realized there was big problems with sea turtle bycatch in shrimp trawls. However, by 2007, in the 1980s, the Far East started to farm shrimp, so now there's a lot of shrimp farming going on. And by 2007, farmed shrimp actually overtook shrimp that was caught from wild stocks. So now, when you eat shrimp, you're probably more likely to be eating shrimp from farm sources, not actually from wild sources. So, however, fish farming also has its environmental impacts that need to be considered. Shrimp trawling accounts for a quarter of all discarded bycatch, and shrimp, just some basic stats from the US, shrimp trawls in southeast USA in the Gulf of Mexico in the 1980s were catching 50,000 turtles annually, and about 20% of those were getting killed. Turtle excluder devices have been trialed in the States, and they've been rolled out in the States, but they're not being rolled out all over the world as they could be. They've had a lot of political and technical obstacles, and a lot of research needs to be done into turtle excluder devices and how they can be used in different fisheries. But overall, shrimp trawls are a large-scale fishing industry. We're now seeing that small-scale fisheries have got really, really huge bycatch all over the world in fish supplying just locally. So a lot of investment is urgently needed to get onboard observations and research into bycatch into small-scale fisheries nowadays.
Thanks, Robin. Actually, a quick bonus question live in on the chat is from Kostas Papifrostos. And he's asking where the photo behind you was taken. He really likes underwater pictures of turtles. Where was that one?
That was in Allegany Bay, which is not far from where I am now, in Cyprus, in North Cyprus. It's one of the most important nesting beaches for green turtles in the Mediterranean.
Thanks, Robin. That's good. That was a nice, easy one to keep somebody happy. Next up is a question for Hind. Now, Hind's a PhD student who works for the government of Abu Dhabi, but she's doing a PhD on sea turtles now, which she leads on for the government. And her question is from Neville Agessa and Luciana Barazzi Basil. Excuse me if I mispronounced your name, tried my best. Does the different coarseness of sand affect hatchlings? And how does the sand affect things for the babies developing the nest in?
So there was a study on the effects of sand types on hatchlings, emergence, locomotor performance that was conducted on loggerhead turtle hatchlings. And the results did show that the incubation to emergence period was significantly longer for those that were in the fine sand rather than the coarse sand. But in terms of survival rate, the coarse sand nest group did have significantly lower latch and emergence success. This can also be due to temperature, not only the coarseness of the sand, but they've also seen that the hatchlings in coarse sand had lower mobility, which makes them an easier target for predators. So they did conclude that fine sand nest sites have the potential to increase the mobility and the fitness of loggerhead turtles.
Thank you very much, Hind. And Hind will be doing studies like that on our hawksbill turtles out in the Gulf. Next question is for Nicola. Nicola is, we're proud to have her as a master's graduate, a PhD graduate, and now a lecturer here in marine biology. And her question is from Coral Smith. Are turtles affected by noise pollution in the ocean?
Okay, thank you for that question. Obviously sounds like quite a simple one, but it's one of those ones that we don't have concrete evidence to definitively say in what way it is. So obviously they will be affected, like marine mammals, which we know a little bit more about. And so we know that they can hear kind of in the low to medium frequency. And so it would be naive to think that we don't disturb them. So we don't know in exactly what way, sorry, my internet just dropped out for a minute. But it becomes a problem when it deters them away, for example, from foraging or from where they nest. And so when I've been on the beach observing them, you can see that they can hear above water. Obviously, they're adapted for life underwater, so that's where you'd imagine that they hear their best. And so any noise such as boat traffic and seismic surveys, we know will be having some effect, but to what scale at the moment is still a bit of an unknown.
Okay, great answer, thank you very much. Now, the next question is for Casper. Casper, for a number of years, worked out in Kenya on the coast, running a turtle program out there, and he's now here doing his PhD. Your question, Casper, is from Jan Posma, and his question is a broad one and a long one, but he would like to hear from scientists where they think we should focus our conservation efforts in terms of measures, species, life stage, or regions. He realizes that it's not, we don't want a huge treatise on that, but he wants a gut feeling from your scientific DNA. Where should we be working?
All right. Yeah. Thanks very much, Brendan. Yeah, the question from Oets, I believe, a fellow Dutchman, is a very tricky one, and I think we can everybody here on this meeting now can get together and write a very substantial book about to answer that question. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done all over the world, pretty much for all species at pretty much all life stages for all different aspects of sea turtle conservation. There are several species that have had more conservation actions undertaken for them, like the greens and the loggerheads, that seem to be doing better, but only in certain areas. In other areas of the world, they still need a lot of help. The Kemps Ridleys, hawksbills, and in some parts of the world, again, leatherbacks are quite endangered and really need a lot of help. So it's a very tricky question to answer, actually, Utz. But going from my gut feeling, the area that I've got most knowledge about is the Western Indian Ocean and Africa. So the region there has done some fantastic work, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done there still. Coastal development is expanding quite rapidly there. So climate change, coastal squeeze, as the sea level rises, the beaches get narrower. If there's not enough space inland for the beaches to migrate inwards, then where are the turtles going to lay their nests? As highlighted earlier by Emily, bycatch, both from the high seas and small scale fisheries are, they're big challenges out there as well. So my gut feeling, I'd say the African area needs a lot of work, and that's actually and Brendan will maybe be able to pitch in on this a little bit. On the West African coast, there's a lot of work to be done as well, not just on the East African side.
I agree. Thank you, Casper.
All right.
So Jocelyn Carson was the person that got in with their questions first, I think, because this is the third and final question from Jocelyn, who clearly likes the number 3, because Jocelyn's asking Emily this time, again, what are the 3 things the average person can do to help protect sea turtles? The magic rule of 3s.
Another 3. So, well, because I work on plastic pollution and sea turtles, there's a lot of things people can do in their individual lives to minimize the impact of plastic pollution. So you can look at how you use plastic in your daily life. So reducing use of, say, plastic bags when you go shopping. We also need to think about things like what our clothes are made out of. A lot of our clothes are made out of plastics, and these break down when we wash them, and eventually these microplastics will enter the ocean. And we've done some work to look at sea turtles ingesting microplastics. So lots of different changes that you can make in your life in terms of your plastic consumption, and also get involved in beach cleans and keeping our coastline tidy, because plastic on nesting beaches can impact nesting females when they're trying to nest, and also hatchlings. We don't know how that affects them when their eggs are incubating. As I said in my other 3 question, climate change is a big issue. So not just for sea turtles, but the whole world really. So we can all do our little bit to reduce our carbon footprints and our effects on climate change, and to be aware of the changes that are happening. And finally, I'd say just continue to take an interest in sea turtles, to learn more about them, and also support the NGOs all around the world that work to conserve them.
Great, thank you, Emily. And actually, that links perfectly to a question that came in from Emily Roebuck that was going to be answered by Professor Annette Broderick before she came off the call to allow us enough bandwidth to run the call. But the question came in from Emily, was asking about volunteer programs closing down because of COVID-19. And was it possible that there might be increased pressure of illegal take of turtles and eggs, especially if tourism has taken a total hit around the world? And could it be forcing local people to harvest and take turtles more because of the lack of income? And looking to the future, could this be tracked or measured in any way? And I mean, our own programme out in Cyprus, as evidenced, we're gathering resources and more Cypriots than ever to be involved in the programme, but undoubtedly sea turtle conservation, which in large part depends on volunteers moving around the world, having a wonderful experience, but making great things happen, which depends on tourism donations, is going to take a massive hit this year. So To answer Emily's rallying call about supporting NGOs, I would say that there will be a lot of NGOs, ours included, doing fundraising this summer just to try and get the basics covered. And so that's definitely one thing that people can do, is actually find a way to help real life conservation on the ground. So the next question, well, it's actually a complex of questions, are for Rita. And these are from Maria Pursner. And she's asking, what do we know about the lost years, and do 1 in 1,000 eggs actually survive to adulthood? I think Maria back in the 90s did some volunteer work, and these were the facts that were relayed to tourists, and she wants to know how the science around these 1 in 1,000 and lives to 100 years old and 20 years to maturity, how they match up now, Rita.
Okay, so maybe to get everyone into the context, so this concept of lost years refers to the first stage of life of marine turtles. So after they hatch from their nests on the beach, the hatchlings immediately crawl to the sea and swim offshore into the open ocean, where they remain for at least a couple of years. And it is just very difficult to assess the turtles during this stage. So these were dubbed the lost years, as there was a lot of mystery involved around this life stage. However, since the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of progress. So now there's been some research done where actually small turtles are being tracked live with satellite tracking. And so there's some new information. So for most species, we know that they do avoid the coastal waters, probably because they're predator-rich waters, and they do go offshore. However, it was thought that they were like passively drifting with the currents. So they would just like go with the currents. And now we know that they actually can do some oriented swimming, even though they're very small. So they do use the currents to facilitate their movement, but then they correct themselves to find best habitats. So maybe they're looking into warm areas, and also they like to associate with floating algae like sargassum, probably because they have nice conditions there, and they also have food associated. So there's a little more information. However, it is not the same with all species. So interestingly, there's one species in Australia that only exists around Australia, which is the flatback turtle, that does not go offshore, it always stays near shore. And then we have the bigger leatherback turtle, which always stays offshore. So we only get to see them when they're back on the beach. So there's still quite a lot of mystery, let's say, but it's getting better. We have more information. So I think the question about how many turtles can reach adulthood from, say, 1,000 eggs, if it's one, or how many, it's a very tricky question. It is, first, it's very variable between populations, and it's very tricky because it associates with this kind of a lost year stage. So we don't have very good, reliable information on the survival rates of post-hatchling turtles. So at this stage, they are for most species, they are in the open ocean, and the mortality is probably the highest there. So they'll have marine life preying on them, they have seabirds preying on them. So it could be something into like 1,000 eggs leading to one adult, to 100 eggs leading to one adult. Of course, if you head on anthropogenic impact, then these probabilities go really low. But we do need to learn more about survival rates. I'll just finish by saying that normally, if in a stable population, a female will always have to generate at least 2 turtles, to keep balance, so for herself and the mate. And of course, we have many populations that now are under conservation efforts that are growing. So we know that it's more than this, right? We know that each adult female is generating more than 2 adult turtles. But yeah, we don't have a correct answer for this.
Excellent answers to very difficult questions, tricky questions. The next question is for Hind, also again from Maria Purzna, and it's basically about moving nests away from the sea. Some volunteer programs move nests up to the back of the nest, and she's asking if, because of the peculiarities of turtle incubation, this might be altering sex ratios, etc. What would you have to say to that, Hind?
So in general, yes, temperature does, sex does depend on temperature, and it is determined by temperature. And it is one of the impacts of climate change we are trying to study on marine turtles, specifically with my research. With regards to moving the nests from their natural location, we always suggest it's better to keep them at their natural beaches. And yeah, it's always better to keep things at their natural state rather than moving them to different locations, because you're not sure if the way you relocate them would actually harm them rather than protect them.
Thank you very much, Hind. The next question is for Nicola. It's from Emily. How has the use of technology helped in the research and conservation of sea turtles? You know, and she's thinking, obviously she's interested in tech and thinking about things like drones.
Yeah, so I'm not a massive techie myself, so my answer might be a tiny bit biased. I think it has massively helped, but again, it's kind of a two-sided one. So it's helped loads, but you can't get away from also needing that physical presence as well. And so I think Emily's worked on Ascension before as well. And so for anybody that's unfamiliar, Ascension Island has hundreds of turtles nesting on one beach, Long Beach, every night. And so you can kind of imagine that a drone would be really useful for capturing all the different tracks from above. But in reality, it would then take a lot of ground truthing as well. So you'd have to take the photo with the drone, you'd have to see what it suggests, then you'd have to ground truth it yourself. So it just really depends. If you need a crude estimate of the sea turtle population, then yes. Or for example, where they've been used to look at not nesting turtles, but in lagoons. There's been some great work carried out by members of this team on that, and you can count them very easily. So I think it just really depends on the purpose. And those radio trackers that I mentioned in that little pre-video that we put on Facebook, that it was a bit of a novel use, using them to find out how many times the sea turtles nest. So often radio trackers, you see them being used on badgers or following mammals around the woods, but this time we used so I thought Emily asked on Facebook how many. We used 20 on the turtles, and each time they came up from the sea, so we actually had to be on the beach ourselves, so it didn't take out all of the labor intensive element to it, but every time the turtle came up we knew she was there, and so we knew exactly how many times she nested. In that piece of research, prior to that being carried out, it was only, what was it, about 6 years ago now, I lose track slightly. Before that, they thought that turtles on Ascension nested 3 times in each season, but actually we found that they nested 6 times. And so just that simple piece of tech gave us that kind of really in-depth insight. And so sorry, I'll stop now, but yes, lots of opportunities.
No need to be sorry, Nick, that was great. The next question is for Robin, and it's from Catherine Lee Hing, and she goes, "Hi, Team Turtle. How effective do you think LED nets will be to help reduce turtle bycatch? Looking at costs, do you think that fishers from developing nations will be able to afford the use of them? And what's the chances that this will become common practice?" I guess I would also encourage you to define LEDs and outline that a wee bit, Robin. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for your question, Catherine. I'll just start with a little bit of background as to how these LED lights are used and in what context. So fishermen, and quite often small-scale fishermen, use set nets on the bottom of the sea, and they are basically nets with a float line at the top and a lead line at the bottom. So they're just a vertical wall of net, which is set in the water, and they can be set for hundreds of meters or even many kilometers. And they passively stop fish in their tracks and catch them by their gills or entangle them. But turtles also get caught in these nets accidentally, and quite often the nets are set for long periods of time. The turtles can't come up to breathe and they drown. And now we're finding that these set net fisheries are having really high bycatch mortality rates and high annual levels of turtles are killed. So about 10 years ago, research began in the States and in Mexico into how these attaching lights to nets to help the turtles see them, or lights which might specifically, wavelengths of light which might specifically cause turtles to respond to the net's presence. So they started to attach LED lights, and specifically green or UV LED lights onto nets at set intervals about every 10 meters along the net. And they found that there was some significant sea turtle bycatch reduction with like 50 to 60% bycatch reduction. And our group in the University of Exeter with a local partner in Peru called Prodelphinas have used similar LED and more recently and have found a 70% reduction with green turtles. But the LEDs have been they're quite expensive. So as you say, I mean, I'm quite optimistic because the trials are showing good results, but yeah, they are expensive, and quite often these fisheries are, as I say, small scale fisheries. Initially, the LEDs were at around £40 each around 10 years ago, which is completely unfeasible for most small scale fisheries to have so many, because each fisherman would need to have hundreds of these LED lights on their nets. But the work has continued and the results are getting better and better. And as the results are getting better, we're teaming up with the industry. For example, there's a company in the south of England called Fish Tech that produce these, that are now starting to produce these LEDs and market them specifically for sea turtle bycatch. So we're working with them in Cyprus, and in 2019, the devices that we used with them were at around £20, and we've tested those and we've made them better with Fish Tech. And now the lights that they're coming up with are marketed at £7, so they've come really a long way down. And as the technology is getting better, they're becoming more efficient. We should be able to get the cost of them down further. Actually, there's a cost in catching sea turtles in set nets, because sea turtles, when they get caught in nets, they can tear the net, and it takes the fishermen some time to release the turtle. So if fishermen are catching lots of turtles, they'll probably want to be avoiding that, and it may come to the point where the LEDs are at a low enough cost with a high enough bycatch reduction that it's even in small scale fisheries in low income countries, they might be economically viable. But certainly in the Mediterranean, we've got high income countries with lots of small scale fisheries. There's no reason why, if these are shown to have really positive effects, that within the next 5 to 10 years they could become used in common practice. We might see really big impacts in terms of the numbers of turtles that are getting killed every year reducing.
Brendan, I think you're muted.
Ha ha! Thank you very much. I was muted there. The next one's for Casper. Has anyone found a solution for red ants attacking nests and killing hatchlings?
Right. I believe there's questions from Luciana as well.
Yeah, sorry, I did read that, but
that's all right.
Into oblivion with no microphone.
That's all right. So that's Luciana from Kenya. Very glad to be receiving a question from you, and glad to hear things are going well out there with all the turtle conservation efforts. Red ants are a problem though, and not just in where you guys are, but in many places. The answer to that one is actually quite simple. Prevention is better than a cure. Getting the red ants out of that nest once they're in is very difficult. I saw in your question you've placed neem branches around the nest to see if that does something. For those of you who are listening who don't know, neem trees seem to be brilliant as a natural pesticide, but we don't know what effect the active substances in the neem, what effect that might have on the turtle eggs themselves. We don't actually know either whether they're effective against ants. So that's something that can be researched separately. If we're wanting to look at, you know, what sort of detrimental impacts neem could have on turtle eggs, seeing as they're protected animals, that might be a less popular research project. But to prevent is better than cure. So in order to prevent these red ants getting into the nest, it's actually quite simple. You have to keep the sand clean. So I know that in your area, you guys have a real issue with coastal development and a reduced area of effective, good quality nesting ground. So nests do need to be moved. And there are certain areas that you're able to move these nests to. The space is limited, the number of nests is relatively high, but the best thing to do is to allocate spaces and be very systematic about, okay, we're going to move a nest to this space this year, and then no other nest will be moved to that space again, not even after the nest hatches. Just leave that area to rest for a year. Even the next season, if possible, just don't put another nest there, and the sand will actually be cleaned out by little microbes sitting in amongst the sand grains. They'll clean all the nutrients, all the sort of well, bits of egg and everything that are left after the nest is hatched. They'll clean that stuff away, and then there's nothing for the ants to go for. So they'll move away from that area, and that means that you can then put a new, a fresh batch of eggs there if it needs to be relocated at any point. As Hind said earlier, if you don't need to relocate, please don't, because it's always better to leave the eggs where they need to be, where the mother has put them, because she does know best. But sometimes you just don't have a choice. So, but to summarize, keep the sand as clean as possible and be very systematic about where you're going to be moving the eggs to. Keep track of what time and what point in time there was a nest in that space, and then try and not stack nest after nest after nest into the limited sand, because that's why you get these ants.
Thank you very much, Casper. Sounds like you've experienced that. I've experienced being bitten by red ants. It's not very much fun. Next one is for Rita, and it's from Penelope Neve. And Penelope asks, is it true that the plastron of male turtles is concave during the breeding season, the plastron being the undershell of the turtle?
Well, yes. Starting from the beginning, so male sea turtles are similar to females in size and color. So it's usually difficult to tell them apart if you're not trained. But yes, they do have a slightly concave plastron. They also have a very long tail that extends well beyond the posterior end of the carapace, and they have longer recurved claws in both front and rear flippers. The leatherback being the exception, because it does not have these claws. And all these three characteristics together, they are very important to help males hold on to the female during mating. Mating can last for up to 2 hours. It's a long process, and males do need all the help that they can get, as typically other males can get very aggressive and try to dislodge the couple during mating. And that said, I also like to add that, and this is why our job also sometimes is difficult. There's so many uncertainties. And one of the things that happened to me last year in Guinea-Bissau, in Poilão, in this island that I have here in the background, is that I saw 3 turtles at the beach. They looked like males. They had the long tail, recurved claws, and yet they were engaged in nesting. So intersex exists, we know that, in sea turtles, where you can have a turtle that has both functional testes and functional ovary, and we just sometimes think things are clear, and then these things come up. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Rita. We have a question. Some of the more recent questions we're now down to now. So Stephen Mowat, he says that he's used underwater turtle cam footage as an educational and outreach tool. It's always a big hit and a powerful learning experience. What are the team's favourite turtle resources, video or otherwise, for engaging people in meetings, the home or the classroom? And I know Emily said she wanted to respond to that one, and if anyone else wants to join in. Over to you, Emily.
Yeah, so personally, showing images is great. So I work on ingested plastic, and sometimes just seeing an image of how much plastic we found inside one turtle is quite powerful. But what's even more powerful, I find, when I go and do talks, is to actually have some of the samples with me. So people can actually see the quantity and the type of plastic that was found inside a turtle. So that's extremely powerful. We have examples of a balloon with a skull and crossbones on it, and tubs full of plastic just out of one turtle. And also we have samples of plastic that we've got out of sand or nesting beaches, hundreds and hundreds of tiny pieces of microplastic. So that's quite a powerful tool.
And the footage behind Emily is actually taken by a turtle. The head is hiding behind her, and that's a camera by the Zoological Society of London and the island of Príncipe of Central Africa. One turtle filming another turtle. So anyone else want to add something there? Casper?
Yeah, so I agree with Emily. So what's really powerful is if you can actually bring something real for people to see and maybe not to touch. You know where those bits of plastic have come from that Emily brings to these. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. What we did in Kenya was outreach programs with the local schools, and because the organization where I was working, Local Ocean Conservation, was running a rehabilitation center, if the kids would come and visit and we would teach them about coral reefs or mangroves or anything like that, all the kids would always be brought to the rehabilitation center, and if there happened to be a patient at the time, to actually see a turtle in real life. For a lot of the kids in Kenya who've never seen underwater, haven't gone diving or snorkeling or anything like that, being able to actually see that was a really powerful educational tool. So if the opportunity exists wherever you are as listeners, using your local turtle NGO, if they've got a rehabilitation center, would be a great educational tool as well.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Sandy George, and he asks, based on Nicola's video, are there no tides on Ascension Island? Just wondering how you managed to count that many tracks.
Yep, good point. No, so there is very little tidal range on Ascension. So a lot of the time, it's actually relatively easy to count the tracks, depending on how easy you think it is to walk along and count 400 emergences. It takes quite a while, but very little tidal range. Occasionally, though, they do get what they refer to on the island as rollers, and that's when the whole beach is literally submerged. So not to the extent that it destroys the nests, although sometimes it does. But when that happens, we just don't count. So I'm not going to bore people by going into the details, and it's not really one of my areas of expertise either. But there are some pretty clever mathematical modelers out there, and so just if we don't count the beach once or twice, it's not a write-off, and we have the resources available to us to be able to actually predict and keep our monitoring reliable.
Thank you very much. Camille Bale or Bai asks Emily, based on her video, during your PhD, did you notice if some sea turtles eat biofuel plastics rather than ordinary plastics?
Biofouled?
Biofuels, I think maybe alternative,
Okay.
bioplastic, these new things.
It's really hard to know that. We do look at the polymer kind of makeup of the plastic, and a lot of it is polypropylene or polyethylene, or polyethylene tetraphthalate. So that's stuff like single-use plastic water bottles, single-use plastic bags, very undescript hard pieces of plastic, which we can see all around us in our lives. So no, not really. There has been some work done looking at how these biodegrade, and but I've not come across that as the main one of the main polymers that we find ingested by sea turtles.
Thank you, Emily. I've now got a surprise question for Rita, and it's from Bex McGivitt on the live stream. And Bex asks, how important do you think swimways are for migrating sea turtles? I know it's something that you're interested in West Africa from Pulau, so I've thought of you, Rita.
Yes, so I guess first I'll start by saying that it really depends on the turtles, on the species, and on its behavior. So you have some marine turtles that have quite variable migratory routes, so they don't seem to follow a specific migratory corridor, and they forage in very open areas. But you have other populations that do follow these migratory corridors, and this is the case of marine turtle, green turtle population I work with in West Africa, in Guinea-Bissau. So we found that these turtles, they migrate mostly northwards, and they follow this corridor close to the shore. And then we also found that they stop and forage in different areas along the west coast of Africa. And actually, a lot of these areas where the turtles are foraging are within marine protected areas, because there is actually a network of marine protected areas in West Africa. And it's a great example of the importance of such a network to protect the turtles. So in this case, a swimway protection makes all the sense. We know we can easily estimate what is the area of high use, and we can identify the stopovers and what are the main feeding areas. And if we protect those places, then we know that we are protecting most of the population. And this can be done, I guess, in two ways. You can have the marine protected areas in these more static areas, and then in the corridor you can have limit anthropogenic activities, so that the turtles, at least during their post-breeding migrations, are fairly free from conflict with human activities.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had a question for Hind out there in the Arab Emirates, and there was a question from Jack, and he's asking, given how amazingly hot it gets in the Gulf in the summer, are there any special adaptations for the sea turtles, whether they're nesting or in the sea?
So that's basically the question I'm trying to answer through my research, but so I can't really say for sure at the moment. But what we have started to see with Abu Dhabi hawksbill turtles is that they are coming to nest earlier in the season when it's a bit cooler than midsummer in July. And we've also seen that the incubation duration is a bit shorter. So there's something happening there which we are looking more deeper into, but I don't have a definite answer as of yet.
So I have a question for Lydia Tevanan, and this one's for Casper. I think presumably thinking about the work out in Africa. I have a question on sea turtle bycatch. I've heard it's an issue for many turtle species, but what degree do you think it's affecting population numbers and globally, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's also a tricky one because, I mean, okay, so our bycatch is a big problem, definitely. But we don't quite know yet how big the problem actually is, because it's not really been quantified properly, because in order to see or to know how many turtles are actually bycaught and whether it's having an impact on a species, global species population level. We'd need to know how many, well, first of all, how many turtles we've got and how many turtles are being caught. We don't have observer data or anything from all the ships that are out there all the time. A lot of fishing does happen without people knowing about it. This is especially the case also for the small scale fisheries. But what we do know is that it's a significant impact for sure. That will, well, let's put it this way: if there wasn't a bycatch program or bycatch problem impacting sea turtle populations, then yeah, we'd see a much stronger recovery and a much higher number of sea turtles everywhere in the world, and also in the area where I've worked the most, in the Western Indian Ocean. So the exact answer to that is hard to say, but most probably yes, it's having a very very serious impact on the population of sea turtles everywhere.
Okay, so we've passed 4 o'clock now, but we were about 11 minutes late starting. So we're going to start to bring the proceedings to an end. I think it would be, we often, people like to focus on problems, and obviously we're scientists and we like to solve the problems. But I would like to end with a bit of ocean optimism and thinking about conservation success stories. So everybody get their thinking caps on, because I want us all to give examples of what we think have been great conservation successes. But I'm going to unfairly go first. So there are many great conservation success stories in sea turtles. The one prompted by a question from Amy Parnell, who I know did amazing work with communities in Gabon all through the last decade. In Gabon, it's the world's largest nesting population, and the largest nesting population for leatherback turtles. And all of the main beaches have been declared protected by the government of Gabon, and a large program called Gabon Blue was set up, and lots of science was integrated, and the government of Gabon created 27% of its seas as marine protected areas for sea turtles, for the dolphins, for artisanal fisheries, and for biodiversity and whole. So for people and biodiversity, large marine protected areas were created. But one of the flagships for that was leatherback turtles in Gabon. So that's my conservation success, ocean optimism story. I will go to Hind first.
For ocean optimism, as you called it, Brendan, I would say something from the Gulf region. Something that I was really excited about to read, because I haven't joined the government agency that I'm with at the moment, is when they conducted the post-nesting hawksbill tracking from the Gulf region. And that's where 4 countries came together for a common goal, is to understand where the hawksbills go after nesting within the region. And although they are highly migratory in other parts of the world, they found that those that nest in the Gulf do not migrate past it. And they've also found that they are even smaller than the global sizes that have been published in different papers. So I think that was like a big step towards better conservation and understanding the turtles within this region, which has very scarce publications in general.
Thank you. Emily, what about you?
In terms of my research with plastics, I would say the ocean optimism is just the growth in awareness over the last 4 or 5 years to this issue. When I first started my PhD, no one was really talking about plastic pollution. We had no idea what impacts it was having. And now it's very public. Everyone is aware of the public on the impacts of plastic pollution. And sea turtles have been a really great flagship for this issue and continue to be. So I think that's really good.
Thank you very much. Nicola?
Thank you. So I'll use Ascension Island again, but I think somebody hinted at this on the Facebook as well. So nobody lives on Ascension Island. For those of you that know, it's largely there's no right of abode, and so the turtles don't form part of anybody's diet, and so no take there is really easy. And so I think people are a bit like, oh well, is that really a conservation success story? People stop taking them. But it's not just at Ascension Island, so they nest there every 3 years, but for the rest of the time they travel to Brazil and they feed around Brazil. And so I think the success there is that it's been such a joined up effort, and it's not just the measures in one area. For sea turtles, it's kind of got to be working together so that you protect both their foraging grounds, their nesting grounds, and where they are in between as well. And sorry, just to add on one little bit that I missed with the technology as well. So using the technology, it shows the areas where the turtles are using, and so having that insight as well is so important. And so it's kind of, yeah, this joined up thinking, I think, it's the real conservation success.
Brilliant. Then Rita, and then Casper, and then last but not least, Robin.
Well, I'm going to talk about Guinea-Bissau. It's the country where I've been working mostly in these last years. And our partners in Guiné-Bissau, the Instituto da Biodiversidade and Áreas Protegidas, the Institute of Biodiversity and Protected Areas, IBAP, they've been doing an amazing job. So in 2000, they created 2 marine protected areas, which were based on other resources, but sea turtles were highly considered for the definition of these marine protected areas. They've been doing just such a great job in monitoring these habitats, engaging the local communities in sea turtle conservation. And we can see the results because, well, you can see all these turtles behind me. This is from Poilão Island. It's one of the largest rookeries for green turtles in the world. And it's been growing in the last years, thanks to the efforts of IBAP and its conservation partners. So that's a success. And I'll also say that there's another cause for optimism because just last year we've managed to start a new project in Mauritania in partnership with the National Park of the Banc d'Argam. And this makes perfect sense because these green turtles here that nest in this tiny island of Poilão in Guinea-Bissau, a lot of them forage in Mauritania. So now, for the first time, there will be like a large-scale project to preserve the turtles at that huge foraging area. So there's cause for optimism, yes.
All right. For me, 2 areas also in my part of the world where I've done most of my work, which is in Africa. Two causes for ocean optimism which are close to my heart. The first one would be the incredible progress that the sea turtle conservation work and scene has made in Mozambique, especially in South Mozambique. Is absolutely incredible to think. When I lived there, when I was a kid from 94 to 98, and the state of the country, how things were at the time, to think that at this point in time they're doing a really great job with monitoring and tracking and conservation of sea turtles well, especially in South Mozambique, is absolutely incredible. And then the second one is very close to my heart. That's the suspected upward trend of nests observed in Watamu in Kenya, where I was working. The organization there has been going for 20 years. And we think now that we're seeing the fruits of 20 years of labor, as its number of nests per year are slowly going up. So we're very excited to start looking at that data in more in depth and get our statistical analysis on the go. But that's a real cause for ocean optimism as well. Very exciting.
Robin. Yeah, that's it.
I'm going to talk about the Mediterranean, which is my area of work. So the Mediterranean loggerhead turtle is now classified by the IUCN Red List as least concern. It's not on the endangered species red list as a conservation concern species, and that's largely because of the collaborative work of conservation NGOs in Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. So the nesting beaches were investigated before some of the major development happened in those countries with tourism, and tourism is a really big issue in the Mediterranean. And because we've isolated and identified and protected some of these nesting beaches like Zakynthos in Greece, Dalyan in Turkey, Lara Beach in the south of Cyprus, and Alagadi in the north of Cyprus, we now have these safe areas where turtles can continue to nest. So that's been a really good result and is a cause for great optimism. But bycatch is still a really big problem throughout the Mediterranean, and we're just starting to touch the iceberg of that now. And a lot of research and a lot of work is needed. But over the last 3 to 4 years, and during the coming three years, there's been this project by the Mava Foundation, which is a philanthropist group supporting NGOs in the region, and they're getting the different NGOs to work together to do onboard observations in the fisheries, try to find out the baseline bycatch problems in the different fisheries, and then to try to work in those fisheries to build in mitigation like the LED lights or developing fisheries management and MPAs. So I'm quite optimistic that over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, we might see even more improvement in the status of sea turtles that are in the Mediterranean, the loggerhead and green turtles.
Thank you very much, everybody. So we've done more than a full hour now, and I think it's quite nerve-wracking doing this stuff, especially with the technology. So I'm going to let everyone off the hook in a moment. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for everybody that's attended and watched this on the web. Sorry about the few technical difficulties. We've had far more questions than we can answer, but we're now going to go away and we're going to respond to your comments on the posts and give you your answers. But lastly, as a cause for conservation optimism, is the fact that people in communities are working on sea turtles all over the world. Some of them are starting to make livelihoods from them. People like these lovely young people around me on this post are doing great work for them, and also people like you on the other side of the internet are actually sitting and wanting to find out more about them, and all of that's a good thing. So without further ado, Rita's going to cut the pipe, and we're going to thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you all the panelists for contributing. I'm sorry, Annette, we didn't have enough bandwidth for you to join us. But now we'll go and answer all the remaining questions on the Facebook post. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a positive word or two to encourage all these young people with their sweaty, cold palms of their hands, and like me, and we might do another one. Thank you very much. Over to you, Rita.